Hackers is a 1995 film written by Raphael Moreau and directed by Ian Softly. It centers around the exploits and antics of a young group of hackers who get wrapped up in a corporate conspiracy. They have to fight for their own lives as the police hunt them down for a crime they didn't commit. Hackers is an interesting film. It underperformed at the time of release, making only $7.5 million back from its $20 million budget. That already sounds bad, but it's even worse when you consider advertising and marketing budgets, which aren't included and can be as much as 50% of a film's budget. Hackers, however, found a home as a cult classic. It's camp, cheesy, late 90s / early 2000s aesthetic and anti-establishment themes, making it appealing to queer people, hackers, and bad movie watchers alike. I'm a little late to the hackers party. Plenty of people have poked fun at this movie and discussed its weirder parts before, but I want to take a different perspective. Hackers is, at the end of the day, a movie about a group of young rebels being framed as terrorists for daring to go against the status quo. And while I don't think it's explicitly queer in the way most representation should be, I think it carries a lot of interesting themes about being queer in America, and with increased persecution of queer and trans people in particular, I think it's worth examining and unpacking what it has to say. Let's start with some background, shall we? I want to preface this by saying that I have very little knowledge when it comes to hacking culture, and hacking techniques. I did some research, but most of it was aimed at the history of the film, so I apologize ahead of time if I get something wrong. Hacking has been around for a long time, as it turns out. I was genuinely surprised just how far back hacking techniques had started. Arguably the first hackers struck as far back as 1878. Teenage boys hired to operate switchboards for the Alexander Graham Bell Telephone Company would purposely misdirect calls to mess with their bosses.
Hey, is there a butts here? See more butts? Hey, everybody! I want to see more butts!
Funnily enough, this is the reason most operators in media are women, as the Bell Telephone Company stopped hiring boys after this incident and opted for female employees instead. Tangents aside, hacking has been around for a long time, and with burgeoning technological advancements in the 80s and 90s, it was becoming more of a cultural powerhouse than it had ever been. Most people, including the police and the lawmakers, saw this as a threat, and so in the public eye, hackers had a pretty negative reputation. Raphael Moreau, however, saw opportunity in this growing movement. He was interested in hacking, and more specifically the hackers themselves, and so he aimed to capture the subculture before it became the next big thing. He didn't want to make a sleek and serious tech movie, playing into the already present idea of hacking as a form of dangerous espionage.
It was not originally developed at a studio. There wasn't somebody saying kind of like, oh cool, let's do a rollerblade movie. Kids are really into that.
He wanted to present the people in hacking as they were, a bunch of awkward weirdos doing what they love and trying to find their own place in a corporate world. After hours and hours of interviews with a number of hackers, Moreau completed the script and presented it to a film executive, securing funding for his film. Ian Softly would take the reins as director, hiring relatively unknown actors and putting his all into the production of the film. He introduced his actors to the hackers that Moreau had met with, and put them through typing and rollerblade training. You know, the two things hackers love most, typing and rollerblading. Well, background's finished, so without further ado, here is 1995's queer masterpiece, Hackers. I'll start by running through the plot of the film. Bear with me please, I hate summarizing. The film follows Dade Murphy, a young, fresh-faced, definitely not in his mid-20s, 18-year-old boy who just recently moved to New York with his mom. When Dade was 11, he created a virus that crashed 1,507 systems, the biggest computer crash in the world. As his sentence, he had computer and internet access removed till his 18th birthday. But here he is, newly 18 and flying into New York, the city shifting into a circuit board as he imagines the opportunities waiting for him. After a brief and unsuccessful battle with a hacker the night before,
shit on me.
Dade arrives at school looking like the hippest fisherman on the block. He immediately walks up to one of the few people too busy to talk to him, and here's when we start meeting Dade's soon-to-be friends. The boy talking to Venezuela is Phantom Freak, his name being a fun nod to phreaking, or phone phreaking, a type of hacking revolving around phones. We even see Freak using some phreaking techniques later in the film.
Please deposit $5 for the first minute. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Dade stumbles around school, meeting Angelina Jolie's character Kate, who just so happens to be the hacker from last night, and Joey, the baby who double-fists cigarettes in every scene.
My name's Joey, but, I'm not an addict.
We also meet Nikon and Serial Killer soon after this, but we'll talk about them a little later. Joey, egged on by talk of righteous hacks, decides to hack into a supercomputer owned by Ellingson Mineral Corporation. He downloads a random garbage file, unwittingly kicking the entire plot into gear. Ellingson's security officer, Mr. The Plague...
My name is The Plague.
Mr. The Plague.
Hacker turned corporate shill, skateboards into the server room like just the coolest guy. He manages to trace Joey's signal just before he logs off, having been interrupted by his mother. Joey takes the disk, only containing half of the garbage file, and tucks it away in a secret spot. We find out through a board meeting scene, followed by some of the worst ADR I've ever heard.
Okay. Yeah, okay. We'll be in touch.
The Plague has created a virus threatening Ellingson as a cover so he can retrieve the disk. The disk is a MacGuffin that we later find out holds evidence of him stealing from his own company. Plague's accomplice eloquently summarizes this for us.
But you've created a virus that's gonna cause a worldwide ecological disaster just to arrest some hacker kid?
Basically, yeah.
I won't be mentioning his partner again because of how little purpose she serves. She exists entirely to be confused by technology and talk to Plague so he can reveal his plans to the audience.
What? What, it left a note? What the hell was that all about?
A hacker planted the virus.
Virus? You've created a virus. Why did I ever trust you? So what are we supposed to do? Murphy kid turned you down? What are you talking about? How much do they know? Launch the Da Vinci virus?
There's a new virus in the database.
What's happening? Rabbit, flu shot, someone talk to me. Cancer?
They're going for the Colonel.
Colonel who? Cancer, brain cancer. Plague? Eugene!
Plague doesn't find the disk and turns to Dade instead, having dug up his record from the Zero Cool incident. He tries to persuade Dade to narc on his friends, but when Dade refuses, he threatens to release his criminal record. The hackers bond at a house party, which we find out is stalked by the Secret Service. We establish a challenge between Crash Override and Acid Burn.
Whoa. Crash and burn.
Interrupted briefly by a great monologue from The Plague, filled with some incredible line readings from Fisher Stevens.
We are samurai, the keyboard cowboys. Moo.
Then the bet between Dade and Kate kicks off as they mess with the head Secret Service agent with some lovely hacker-themed pranks. Oh, and some mild transphobia.
Leather, lace, and water sports. Transvestites welcome. Transvestites.
After being grounded for committing cybercrimes, Joey takes the disc to Freak, not realizing he had a tail, and gets Freak raided. Thankfully, Freak left the disc for Kate, and so she and Serial come to Dade, announcing a truce to the rivalry and asking for help. Dade refuses because of his criminal record, something the other hackers don't actually know yet. He begrudgingly agrees to keep a copy in case they get busted, but turns and gives it to the Plague, motivated by a previous threat to his mother's safety. Plague, of course, retrieves the disc in the coolest way possible, and Dade, who is stricken with guilt, decides he needs to crack the disc himself. He decodes the disc and discovers that it's a virus designed to skim off of Ellingson transactions and line Plague's pockets. He tells the crew that he knows he created the virus and that he gave him a copy of the disc, and they decide to band together to hack into Ellingson, retrieve the rest of the disc, and release it to the world. We get a bunch of fun scenes where the gang commit many crimes and get a hold of the file before getting arrested. Serial, the one person to avoid arrest, releases the information, exposing Plague and getting the rest of the hackers released. We get some nice wrap-up. Dade and Kate go on the date that's been teased through the film, and the film strangely rolls credits through an underwater makeout, the most out-of-place song in the entire soundtrack.
Dreams escape from the fear built inside. In this heart, bring me home. Cast a net, far and wide. Return to the light. Mask of front.
Woo! That took a while. Now that the summary's out of the way, I can finally get to the meat and potatoes of this video. Thematic analysis. I don't think it'd be a shock for most of you when I say this movie is insanely queer-coded. Pretty much every main hacker aside from Joey and the Plague, for obvious reasons, have some element of queer coding, be it character, wardrobe, or actor delivery. Freak is probably the most obvious with his leopard print outfits and adorable kitten shirt that I really want, but stopping there is just scratching the surface. Even the two leads, who for all intents and purposes are the generic straight enemies to lovers trope, embody some level of queerness. I hadn't mentioned it before since it wasn't really important to the summary of the plot, but when Dade and Kate are competing to see who the best hacker is, they improvise a tiebreaker round and raise the stakes of the bet from whether or not they go on a date to who will wear the dress when they go on a date.
I win. You wear a dress on our date.
And if I win, so do you.
Deal.
Seems initially like an offhand joke meant to poke fun at the main lead's masculinity, standard cishet fare, but we quickly find out through a wet dream of Kate's that she's really into the idea of Dade wearing this dress. And frankly, based off of Johnny Lee Miller's performance in his scenes, I'd argue that Dade seems really into the idea as well. The movie sadly cops out in the end, having Kate wear the dress on their date, but the costume designer at least knew what was up, giving Dade this dress-like coat. This is unfortunately how the movie handles queerness, whimper of an ending and all. While I want to, and definitely will, celebrate some of the boundary-pushing elements of this film, because of the time this movie was made in, it was unable to properly commit to the themes and ideas presented. The clearest example of this in my mind is the relationship between serial killer and Nikon. Serial by himself is already a pretty interesting character. I don't know whether or not this was intended by the creators of the film, but Serial reads 100% as a trans woman to me. Think about it. He's one of the queerest characters in terms of wardrobe, rivaling Freak's gay vibes with his femme outfits and hairstyle. His birth name is almost never mentioned, only being brought up when an authority figure asks him for it. Plus, he has a rocky relationship with his parents, a plot point that seemingly serves no purpose to the film outside of this interpretation. Plus, to quote Maya Arson Crimu, real-life trans hacker, certifiable small kitten, and inspiration to this video.
It's funny, you couldn't cast a better cis guy to play a trans woman than Matthew Lillard. And I say that as a trans woman. I'm obviously all against like cis people playing trans people in movies, but
except for Matthew Lillard.
Except for Matthew Lillard,
Yeah.
He gets the pass.
Nikon, however, has a relatively small role compared to the other hackers, and his outfit reads less queer and more like general hacker subculture. Nikon doesn't escape the queer coding though, since he and Serial are shown to be close in a way that to me resembles more than friendship. The first time we're even introduced to Nikon, we get this surprisingly cute moment of Serial asking to crash at his place because of his relationship with his parents.
Nikon, can I crash your place tonight?
Again? Yeah, sure.
Hell, they even managed to make ogling a woman gay.
Yeah. Houston, we have liftoff. 3 o'clock. Check it. Don't look right away.
The way Nikon just grabs his face without asking, and the eager way Serial stares into his eyes. It's the gayest shit I've ever seen. No other way to phrase that.
Hackers penetrate and ravage delicate privates.
Sadly, as I mentioned before, the movie doesn't do much with this, and opts to portray both Serial and Nikon as straight in the end, but the queer vibes are there, and no amount of studio changes is really going to affect the feeling in the performances. Despite their limitations, I think the queer aspect lends a great deal to this movie, turning it from a campy film about hackers fighting the cops into a film about queer people fighting the systems that oppress them. And this movie isn't afraid to address oppression, by the way. I was genuinely surprised on my first watching just how explicit it gets with anti-capitalist themes. I think it's easy for a lot of people to ignore the struggles that queer people go through, and I think it's even easier for them to ignore the role that the government has to play in that. Hackers does not shy away from that, thankfully. It isn't afraid to show the damage and the problems that these systems cause. The main antagonist is Plague, but the ones creating the most physical trouble for our main team are the police. They stage comically violent raids, arresting unarmed teenagers and ripping them out of the homes, all in effort to stop a threat that doesn't even exist. They haphazardly wave guns around in public areas. The one time we see police that aren't from the Secret Service, they're purposefully letting Freak get harassed by other prisoners and locking the keypad so he can't even make his one phone call. There are 3 cops that get a lot of screen time. Gil, the head agent that the hackers played all those pranks on, and 2 minor Secret Service agents who assist Gil in his police raids and survey the hackers throughout the movie. Gil is a figurehead of sorts, spouting nonsense about the hackers being terrorists and calling for more funding to be issued to the police, all while showing off to a reporter he clearly has a crush on.
Agent Gil, can you spare a moment of your time?
Why, of course, Jennifer.
Like the police in real life, he's ultimately just used to enforce corporate well-being, getting manipulated into doing the dirty work for them while innocent people take the fall. The other two cops, though pretty unimportant to the plot of the movie, do a lot to establish the themes. As far as I remember, these two are unnamed, so for now I'll call them Buscemi and Skinhead.
Oh, that's cool. Cool? Yeah, cool. You think it's cool?
There's a scene just after Joey gets released from police custody where Buscemi and Skinhead are chatting while watching Joey's home. Skinhead starts reading an excerpt from the real-life hacker essay/manifesto, The Conscience of a Hacker. Buscemi, though obviously on the side of the police, likes the essay and calls it cool, frustrating Skinhead.
We exist without nationality, skin color, or religious bias. You wage wars, murder, cheat, lie to us and try to make us believe it's for our own good, yet we're the criminals. Yes, I am a criminal. It's cool. It's not cool. It's commie bullshit.
I think these two are a particularly interesting example of real-life problems with the police. Buscemi and Skinhead embody the good cop, bad cop archetypes, or more specifically, cool cop, racist cop, because, I mean, let's be real, all the cops are bad cops. Buscemi doesn't see an inherent problem with the anti-establishment wording of the hacker essay, since he clearly finds hacking interesting, as seen later being impressed by Dade's hacking abilities, and even later when stalking the house party.
How do you do, fellow kids?
Skinhead clearly disagrees, but ultimately it doesn't matter how their personalities and interests differ. At the end of the day, they'll both shove a gun into a teenager's face with no hesitation, and that's the problem. Diversity and difference of opinion is of course good, especially when a big problem in policing is the prevalence of racist beliefs and actions. But the argument of there being good cops is kind of unimportant, because when the good cops blindly follow the examples of the bad ones, when policing is inherently based in corporate greed, when your actions have the capability of ruining lives, intentions don't really matter. The real mastermind behind the police, Plague, is another great example of anti-establishment themes. Plague doesn't subscribe to the same ideology as the other hackers in the film. He hates the company and toys with the police, just like Dade and the team, but his motivations are selfish and greedy. Two other hackers, as Razor and Blade, two characters I have yet to mention, point out,
hacking is more than just a crime. It's a survival trait.
Most of the crew seem to be working class, with the exception of Kate, whose mom is a successful writer.
Her mom makes big bucks writing self-help books for women. Stuff like women who love men who are emotional amoeba.
And even when their financial situation isn't clear, most of them are explicitly members of minority groups, or at the very least coded to be as such. It's not difficult to imagine a scenario where hacking might help you get out of a bad situation as a minority or as a poor person. We even see some examples of that with Freak's phone hacking. But Plague, he looks at hacking not as a means of survival or as a way to correct the injustices being done by those in power, but purely as a means of gaining that power for himself. He already has more resources than any of the other hackers in the film, working for a rich mineral corporation, and yet he still desires more. While he may see himself, as he says, a sovereign nation with power that only he can control, he's still just a slave to the driving theme of capital, success above all else. He spends the whole movie desperately trying to be cool, adopting the aesthetic and language of hackers. But like Buscemi Cop, he's just a shill whose actions live in direct opposition to the subculture he wants to be a part of. I suspect part of the reason he gets so furious when Dade rejects his offer is because that scene is really Plague being rejected from the community he's a member of. It's spitting in the face of all his posturing and unnecessary skateboarding. If the hackers are queer people like the movie codes them to be, then Plague is essentially a pick-me gay in pure form. If you don't know, a pick-me is a person of a minority group who, instead of fighting for the protections and rights of their peers, spends all of their time appealing to the majority groups who oppress them.
And then there's us! Hey, don't lump me in with you losers! I am accepted by all social groups!
For instance, Buck Angel, right-wing narc and trans man, is a good example of this, spending all his time trying to be seen as one of the good ones and ignoring the plights of other trans people who are struggling. Plague embodies this to a T, opting to better his position in his own life while actively putting down people who are like him. There's a lot that could also be said about Plague's role as a representation of ethical hackers. hackers who hack without committing crimes and often work for companies, but I'll leave that one for actual hackers to discuss. In the end, Plague's greed and misunderstanding of hacking are what get him arrested, and the police are forced to recognize that they've been tricked and let their culprits free. Society hasn't been fixed yet, but it's a genuine moment of hope for the characters, showing that those in power aren't as untouchable as they appear to be, that maybe hackers and queer people alike can be allowed to live for themselves. Hackers is a strange, campy movie from the 90s with weird dialogue and over-the-top performances, but I think it represents more than that. In a time where anti-trans legislation is growing to a ridiculous degree, it becomes increasingly important to fight against queer hatred, and part of the way to do that is to take down the system that continues to harass us. You can choose to hide in the corner like Plague and the other pick-me's, pretending that everything comes down to individual choice, or you can recognize the way these systems create our circumstances and fight to end them. Just a few days ago, at the time of writing this, Maya Arson Crimu published a hack. 2,600 pages of hate, collections of transphobic emails from anti-trans lawmakers, expert witnesses, and conservative legal groups. It's unsurprising as a trans woman to read and hear the awful, disgusting things these people think about us, but it's an incredibly important document showing just how much hatred these people have and how far they'd go to legislate us out of existence. Things will move on and get better. I have to hold some hope that that time will come. But nothing will change unless society accepts how awful things are already. I think this movie, while stupid and weird and kind of terrible, has a lot of interesting themes about the way society others us and how the police, who are supposed to be tools to protect us, are often used to do the exact opposite. I would love to live in a world where all someone needs to be happy and successful is the drive to make it happen, where I don't need to fight just to exist, where we can be ourselves without having to worry about punishment for it. But as long as we refuse to face these threats, that can't happen. You can try to separate queerness from its anti-capitalist roots, but as long as these systems are in place, this level of hatred will always be a threat. Hacking and a lot of forms of activism aren't going to save us on their own. They may lend us power, allow us to do more than we could otherwise, but they're ultimately just tools. Tools in the right hands can save lives, but the first step is understanding what needs to change. I, as much as anyone, would like to forget about the awful things done to people like me daily, but I can't afford to. I have to fight. I have to scream at the top of my lungs and announce to the world what I see happening. We all do. It's not laziness, it's not alarmist, it's survival.